"Wow, this was such a great idea," Amy said, as she leaned onto her husband's arm, with a hand lightly rubbing his back. "The meal was fabulous, and this small orchestra sounds so romantic. Dancing with you is like floating around the room." "Well, it was a rough winter, and Bill and I thought you ladies deserved a night out on the town. We made the reservations 4 weeks ago," John replied with a smile. "It's a good thing you told me about it last week so I could get a new dress." "You look spectacular in that red dress," John said, and then leaned in and whispered, "But I can't wait to see you out of it." Amy laughed. "Yeah, well, what little I have on under this dress cost you almost as much as the dress, so I hope you like it." John stood and escorted Amy back out onto the dance floor. His peripheral vision caught all the stares from the other men as she navigated past a few tables. John was no fool. He knew his bride would likely be the most attractive woman in any room. 32 and the mother of twin 8-year-old boys, Amy still had the figure of a co-ed, and her flawless complexion and radiant smile were a sight to behold. As John expertly twirled Amy around the dance floor, her eyes twinkled with delight as she smiled at her loving husband. They were the very definition of a handsome couple. The loving couple was distracted by some commotion as a small group of people were seated near the bandstand. After a few spins around the room, Amy whispered into John's ear, "Oh my gosh, that's Marcus Washington. I knew he was in town for the governor's charity ball, but I never expected to actually see him." John turned his head and then looked back at his wife. "Yep, that's Washington. I thought he was shooting a movie in New York." "No, that wrapped 2 weeks ago. I can't wait to see it. My God, he's so handsome," Amy answered. "Down, girl! You're talking to your husband, remember?" "Sorry, baby, but you know how much I adore him," Amy replied. "Yeah, you remind me of that every time you see him on TV." John was suddenly aware he was no longer leading, and Amy was stirring them closer to Washington's table. "Babe, you better not be planning to get any closer. The bouncers are watching us," John deadpanned. He turned his head to see that Amy had made eye contact with Washington, and he was giving her his world-famous smile. John quickly twirled Amy back toward the center of the dance floor. Unfortunately, the twirl put Amy and her red dress on full display for Mr. Washington. His world-famous smile broadened as his eyes drank in the view. The music stopped, and John guided Amy toward their table. Once there, the other 3 ladies in their party erupted into girlish chatter about the movie star across the room. John rolled his eyes at Bill, Steve, and Dan. He signaled the waiter for another round of drinks and marveled at the silliness of the 4 mature adult women at his table. The drinks arrived, and he had just taken a small sip of his gin and tonic when Gail gasped and stared over his shoulder. The other women fell quiet, and John felt a presence behind him. "Hello. You folks seem to really be enjoying yourselves this evening," Washington said in his smooth baritone voice. He turned to John and said, "I was quite impressed with your moves on the dance floor. I was hoping you'd grant me the opportunity to dance with your lovely partner." John was completely relaxed. He casually studied Washington and then said, "Thank you for being such a gentleman, but that decision is entirely my wife's." "Amy?" Amy looked up into the warm brown eyes of the movie star she always swooned over. Slowly, she stood and took his outstretched hand. The envious eyes of every woman in the room followed them as he led her to the dance floor. The music started and they came together. He held her loosely as they began to move around the room. For the first several moments, no one else ventured onto the dance floor, then slowly a few couples joined them. As the dance progressed, Washington pulled her a little closer and whispered into her ear, "You are truly beautiful. When I saw your husband twirl you, I was captivated by your grace and style. He is truly the luckiest man here tonight." Amy leaned back and looked into his eyes. She half expected to see a smarmy smirk, but she saw only sincerity in his handsome face. "Thank you, Mr. Washington. I am very flattered by your kind words." "Please, call me Marcus," It's what all my friends call me," he said, and then twirled her away. The song was ending, but the band immediately shifted to another song. Amy started to step back, but Marcus held her and said, "Please, just one more song?" Amy paused, looked over his shoulder, and then allowed herself to be pulled into a tighter embrace. John watched Washington ask Amy for one more dance and gave her a quick nod when she glanced his way. He knew she was thrilled to be dancing with her movie idol, and he could grant her this indulgence. When the music stopped, Marcus placed a hand on the small of Amy's back and escorted her back to her table. John rose to his feet and pulled out the chair on his left. He held Amy's chair for her while she sat. Marcus addressed the table. "I don't want to impose, but I was wondering if I might join you folks for a bit." Gail spoke loudly. "Sure. Shove over John and let him have your seat." John's eyes snapped at Gail and blazed with indignation. She quickly shrank back into her seat. No, I'll just pull a chair around to the end of the table next to you, John, if that's okay," Marcus said as he stepped around behind John's seat. Marcus pulled a chair from a nearby table and sat on John's right. He smiled at everyone at the table. He leaned into John and said, "Your lovely wife is a fine dancer. Thank you again for that privilege." John nodded. "My aunt owns a dance studio, and, as a teen, she often recruited me as a much-needed male dancer. When Amy and I married, we decided to continue to volunteer at her studio." "Well, it clearly shows. You are both very talented on the dance floor, and you make a most impressive couple." Marcus stayed and chatted with everyone at the table. He danced with all the ladies, and Gail embarrassed herself by kissing him at the end of their dance, but he just laughed it off. Near the end of the evening, several of the people from Washington's group came by the table to say goodnight. The last of them was a stunningly attractive young woman of about 23 to 24. She smiled at John as she bent and whispered into Marcus's ear. He nodded and turned to John. "John, Amy, this is Nadia Yeltsin. She is a talent procurement expert with my production company. Nadia, these are my new friends, John, and his lovely wife, Amy." Handshakes were exchanged, and then Nadia, still grasping Amy's hand, said, "Marcus and I are sharing a lovely suite in the penthouse. Would you two like to join us for a nightcap?" Gail grabbed at the others and said, "We're all headed up to our rooms. We'll see you two for a late breakfast in the morning." Her grin could not have been wider. As their friends left, Nadia dropped Amy's hand and slid a slender arm up under John's jacket and around his waist. John stood very still with a shocked expression on his face. Marcus extended a hand to Amy. "Shall we go up?" He smiled at Amy. Amy was frozen in place. She looked at her husband as Nadia molded her body to his side. John looked into his wife's eyes. They held each other's gaze for a few seconds as the unspoken question passed between them. John could see something in Amy's eyes that troubled him. He gently removed Nadia's arm and held her at arm's length, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, but we'll have to decline your invitation. It's been a pleasure meeting you both." Amy's face flickered with an emotion John couldn't quite place. Disappointment? Frustration? But she quickly composed herself and gave a polite smile. "Perhaps another time," Marcus said, his voice smooth as silk. He handed Amy a small card. "My private number, in case you change your mind, or if you're ever in Los Angeles." John frowned as Amy took the card and slipped it into her clutch purse. Marcus and Nadia said their goodbyes and departed, leaving John with an uneasy feeling in his stomach. "Ready to head up?" John asked, offering his arm to Amy. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Actually, I think I need to use the ladies' room first. I'll meet you at the elevator in 5 minutes." "Sure thing," John replied, watching her walk away, the red dress swaying with each step. The next morning, John woke to find Amy's side of the bed already empty. A note on her pillow explained she'd gone down early for breakfast with the girls. He showered, dressed, and headed down to the hotel restaurant, expecting to find Amy and their friends. But when he arrived, only Bill, Steve, and Dan were seated at a large table. "Where are the ladies?" John asked, sliding into a chair. Bill looked up from his coffee. "Gail texted me. Said they're having a girls' morning at the spa instead. They'll meet us back home." John nodded, but something didn't feel right. Amy hadn't mentioned any spa plans. "Everything okay with you and Amy?" Dan asked, buttering his toast. "You two seemed a bit off after Washington showed up." "Yeah, fine," John replied automatically. "Just tired, I guess." As they ate breakfast, John's phone buzzed with a text from Amy. "Getting a massage, then facial with girls. We'll Uber home. See you there. XO." When John returned home that afternoon, Amy was already there, looking refreshed and cheerful. She kissed him on the cheek and chatted animatedly about the spa treatments. But John noticed she avoided making eye contact for too long. Over the next few weeks, John noticed subtle changes in Amy. She was often distracted, checking her phone constantly. Twice she mentioned lunches with the girls that seemed to run unusually long. She'd come home with a glow about her that John hadn't seen in years. One evening, as they prepared for bed, Amy's phone buzzed on the nightstand. John glanced over and caught a glimpse of the text message preview. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. M double quote." "Who's M?" John asked casually. Amy snatched the phone up too quickly. "Just Melissa from yoga class. We're grabbing coffee after tomorrow's session." John nodded but didn't believe her. That night he barely slept. The next morning, after Amy left for her supposed yoga class, John made a difficult decision. He called his friend Steve, who worked in cybersecurity. "I hate to ask this," John said, "but can you track Amy's phone location for me? I think she might be seeing someone." Steve was silent for a moment. "Are you sure you want to go down this road, man?" "I need to know," John replied firmly. That afternoon, Steve called with the results. "Her phone's been at the Riverfront Hotel for the past 3 hours, John. I'm sorry." John's heart sank. The Riverfront was the city's most exclusive hotel, exactly the kind of place a movie star might stay. "Thanks, Steve. I owe you." John drove to the hotel, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He parked in the garage and entered the lobby, unsure of his next move. As he stood there, debating what to do, the elevator doors opened, and out walked Amy, her hair slightly disheveled, wearing the same outfit she'd left the house in that morning. She was laughing at something said by the man beside her, Marcus Washington. John ducked behind a large decorative plant, watching as Marcus kissed Amy's cheek and whispered something in her ear. She nodded, smiling before walking toward the exit. Marcus returned to the elevator. John followed Amy to her car, then drove home, arriving minutes before she did. When she walked in, he was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book. "How was yoga?" he asked, his voice steady despite the rage and heartbreak swirling inside him. "Great," Amy replied cheerfully. "And coffee with Melissa was nice too. How was your day?" "Interesting," John said. "Very educational." That night, John lay awake beside his sleeping wife, formulating a plan. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice and ensuring that both Amy and Marcus understood the consequences of their actions. Over the next month, John played the oblivious husband perfectly. He never let on that he knew about the affair, which continued with Amy making excuses twice a week to meet Marcus. John used this time to set his plan in motion. First, he contacted a private investigator to document the affair thoroughly. The PI provided photos, video, and timestamps of Amy entering and leaving the hotel, along with affectionate exchanges between her and Marcus in public spaces. Second, John met with a divorce attorney, carefully preparing all financial documents. He moved half their savings to a separate account and made sure his business interests were protected. Third, and most importantly, John leveraged a connection through Bill to reach someone at TMZ, the celebrity gossip outlet. The contact was interested in the story of Marcus Washington's affair with a married mother of two, but agreed to hold off publishing until John gave the word. The final piece came when John discovered from their phone records that Marcus was planning to leave town in 3 days. The timing was perfect. On what would be Amy and Marcus's final rendezvous, John executed his plan. He arranged for the twins to stay with his parents for the weekend, telling Amy he had a surprise planned for her. "What kind of surprise?" she asked suspiciously. "The good kind," he assured her. "I've noticed you've seemed happier lately, and I wanted to celebrate that. Just be home by 7 tomorrow night, dressed for a nice evening." Amy looked relieved and agreed, unaware that this happiness John had noticed was from her affair with Marcus. The next day, while Amy was meeting Marcus for their farewell tryst, John transformed their home. He set up a projector in the living room, arranged catering for an intimate dinner, and invited a very specific guest list, their closest friends, including Gail, Bill, Steve, and Dan with their spouses, Amy's parents, John's parents, and their twin boys. When Amy arrived home at 7 sharp, she found John waiting at the door in a suit. "What's all this?" she asked, confused by his formal attire. "Your surprise," John said, taking her hand and leading her inside. Amy gasped when she saw all their friends and family gathered in the living room. "John, what?" "I wanted to celebrate with the people who matter most to us," John said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "because there's something important I need to share." Amy's face paled as John guided her to a seat in the center of the room. The projector screen showed a paused image that appeared to be a hotel lobby. "John," Amy whispered urgently, "what are you doing?" John addressed the room. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I've gathered you here because I believe in honesty and transparency. For the past month, Amy has been having an affair with actor Marcus Washington." Gasps filled the room. Amy's mother covered her mouth in shock. The twins looked confused. "That's ridiculous," Amy sputtered. "I would never—" John clicked a remote, starting the video. On screen, perfectly clear footage showed Amy and Marcus kissing in the hotel lobby, entering an elevator together, and later leaving separately. The timestamps were clearly visible. "This is just from today," John said calmly. "I have similar footage from 8 other occasions over the past month." Amy sat frozen, her face ashen. "John, please stop this. We can talk." "We're beyond talking, Amy," John replied. "But I'm not just exposing your betrayal tonight. I'm also announcing that I've filed for divorce with full documentation of your infidelity. Given the circumstances, my attorney believes I'll receive primary custody of our sons." Tears streamed down Amy's face as she looked around the room at the shocked, disappointed faces of their friends and family. "There's one more thing," John continued. "Since Marcus Washington enjoys publicity so much, I thought he might appreciate this." He held up his phone, showing an email he'd just sent to his TMZ contact with all the evidence attached. "By tomorrow morning, every gossip site and entertainment show will be running this story. His current film promotion tour should be interesting." "You can't do this," Amy whispered hoarsely. "I already have," John replied. "Now, everyone except for Amy's parents and mine are welcome to stay for dinner. Amy, I suggest you pack what you need for tonight. Your mother has kindly offered to let you stay with them while we sort out the details of our separation." As the reality of what was happening sank in, Amy collapsed into sobs. Her parents moved to comfort her while others in the room sat in stunned silence. John turned to his sons, who looked confused and upset. He knelt before them. "I know this is hard to understand, but sometimes adults make mistakes. Your mom and I won't be living together anymore, but we both love you very much. That will never change." The boys hugged their father tightly as Amy was led upstairs by her mother to pack a bag. The fallout was swift and devastating. As John had predicted, the story broke across entertainment media the next morning. Marcus Washington's representatives issued a hasty statement claiming he had no idea Amy was married, despite photos clearly showing her wedding ring and multiple witnesses from the restaurant who could confirm John had been introduced as her husband. The scandal derailed the promotion of Marcus's new film, which opened to disappointing numbers. His squeaky clean image was tarnished, with many fans expressing disgust at his involvement with a married mother. For Amy, the consequences were equally severe. Apart from losing her marriage and damaged relationships with friends and family, she discovered that Marcus had no interest in continuing their relationship amidst the scandal. When she desperately called him the day after John's revelation, his assistant informed her that Marcus was not available and would not be taking her calls. 3 months later, John sat in his attorney's office, reviewing the final divorce settlement. Amy had agreed to all his terms, including generous visitation with the boys, but primary custody remained with John. Her parents, disappointed by her actions, had encouraged her to accept the settlement rather than drag things out in court. As John signed the papers, his attorney asked, "Was it worth it? The public exposure, involving the children?" John thought for a moment. "I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for honesty. Our entire relationship was built on trust, and once that was gone, everything needed to come into the light." He paused. "The boys deserved to know why their family was changing. Our friends deserved to know who they were really friends with. And yes, the public deserved to know who Marcus Washington really is." "And Amy?" John sighed. "Amy deserved consequences for her choices. We all do. But despite everything, she's still my son's mother, and I hope eventually she finds her way back to being the person I thought she was." 6 months after the divorce was finalized, John received a letter from Amy. She was in therapy, she wrote, working to understand why she'd risked everything for the fantasy of a relationship with a celebrity. She apologized for her betrayal and asked for nothing except the chance to rebuild trust with him for the sake of their children. John read the letter twice before placing it in his desk drawer. He wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. But for the first time since discovering the affair, he felt a small measure of peace. Life was moving forward, not as he had planned or hoped, but forward nonetheless. That evening, as he helped the twins with their homework, his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Coffee sometime?" "Just to talk." "A." John stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Maybe someday?" It wasn't forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't reconciliation. But it was acknowledgement that even after the most painful betrayals and the most complete revenge, life continued. And sometimes, that was enough. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.